All right. So we're about to enter 2:05. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Salome Garcia and I am the program manager with the Clio Institute. And this is our letter to the editor webinar. So I'm going to be introducing our panelists, but really quickly before I do that, I want to give the floor to Julieta with Clio to introduce herself and also tell you all a little bit about the logistics of the webinar, how you can participate and what we can expect. Go for it, Juli.
Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Julieta. I am the Associate Program Manager of Gen Clio, here based in Miami, Florida. So today we have a fun and exciting workshop to teach you all how to do letter to the editors and what they are and why they matter and why we should write them. So in order to communicate with the panelists, we have a chat function. If you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, if you're on a desktop, you should see a Q&A. And there you can post your questions. You can also pose questions directly to the panelists if that's something that you wish to do so. And if you experience any difficulties, you can definitely just insert in the chat or our Gen Clio chat if you experience anything as a difficulty and a hindrance. But thank you so much for joining, and we're excited to get started.
Yay, thank you, Juli. So I also just did a little example message on the webinar chat. So as I introduce our panelists, I want you all to write your name and what part of Florida you're coming from. Also, if you're representing another organization, I know that we're joined by a lot of people from our climate throughout the state as well. So feel free to put like, hi, my name is blank and I live in Miami, or I live in Tampa, or I'm in Tallahassee. And that way the participants can see where you are all coming from. So I'm Salo and I'm from Tallahassee. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. So we have Kate Stein joining us. So Kate Stein is the Resiliency and Sustainability Officer for the Town of Surfside, Florida, which is in South Florida in the greater Miami area. She coordinates the work on Surfside's climate crisis report and action plan and develops community education. She develops outreach initiatives for climate change and the town's response. Outside of her work for Surfside, Kate also has received grant funding to develop climate reporting training for Florida journalists and newsrooms, which she expects to pilot in 2020. Kate has a lot of really awesome experience. She's been a journalist that covers climate change and environment all throughout Florida. She was formerly a staff reporter for NPR's local affiliate WLRN in South Florida. And she's been a contributor to outlets including NPR, The Scientific American, The New Republic. She's also consulted with the City of Miami's Resiliency and Sustainability Program, and she's organized a bunch of workshops across the Miami area on local climate change impacts. And then we also have Cara Fleischer. So she's a mom activist for Mom's Clean Air Force. Basically, her kids have asthma, and she's deeply concerned about the negative effects of climate change that are happening in her home state of Florida and the people that live here overall. So Kate is from Tallahassee, and through her advocacy with Citizens Climate Lobby and Mom's Clean Air Force, she's basically found her voice as a regular contributing writer to the Tallahassee Democrat newspaper. So she basically discovered her calling as a creation care leader for the Florida United Methodist Church. She ran for office in 2018 and was elected as a Leon Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor. So basically she advocates for the environment as an elected official at the local level. And she's been a trained climate reality leader and earth keeper. She's the communications chair for a local organization, Tally 100, which is a group that moves to 100% renewable energy in Tallahassee. And she's on the board of directors of Rethink Energy Florida. So these are two very qualified professionals that have a ton of experience in journalism, writing, and with local municipalities as well. So we encourage you to ask them questions and anything that you can think of. And I'm going to hand it over to Kate now to get us started.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that really nice introduction, Salo. I'm really excited to be with you all here today. A lot of what I'm trying to share my screen at the same time. Coming up here. A lot of what I work on is driven by the Clio Institute. When I was a reporter before I had my current job, They were the ones who really taught me about climate change as a local issue. So a lot of what I do today is thanks to them, and I wanted to pay it forward, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to do so. So what we're going to do today is just sort of go over a quick rundown of what is a letter to the editor, how you might think about writing one. We'll talk with Cara about her experiences in writing for audiences and some of the reactions she's gotten. And then I really want to have a discussion about ideas for letters to the editor and sort of the things that we are passionate about and we could be advocating for through the newspaper. So let's go ahead and get started. Feel free to type questions in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on them, but Salo and Huli, if you guys could also just give me a heads up if there are questions, that would be great. So we are in the midst of two crises, as the slide suggests, and we're going to talk about the connections between coronavirus and climate change toward the end of this presentation, because I think that's really important, especially when we're talking about writing for a news outlet, which, you know, obviously news is what drives what gets published. So we'll get there, but first of all, just a quick rundown of, you know, what is a letter to the editor. So as some of you may know, there is, hopefully all of you know, that a newspaper has news and then it has editorial content, which is opinions, reactions, things that are not just based in fact, but also emotion. And so there, in a newspaper's editorial section, there are usually 4 or 5 key elements. We have the letters to the editor, which we're going to talk about in pretty great detail, but I also wanted to just give you a heads up about some other things that you might be able to write personally too. One of those being an op-ed. So an op-ed, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that might be an opportunity as well because it's a little bit longer. It gives you a little bit more creativity and flexibility. And then obviously editorials and columns. And I can't see if my other bullet came up, but that's cartoons. So we have that. Okay, so letters to the editors. Typically they're pretty short. The length kind of varies from paper to paper. Usually if it's going to be in print, it'll be about 100 to 200 words. The papers really like to save space on LTEs that are printed, but online there's a lot more flexibility. So you might go up to 500 words there. They're usually written by a community member, and people often write them to respond to an article or give an opinion, but sometimes they're also used to highlight an issue that the newspaper isn't talking about as much as they could be. So that's obviously something to keep in mind with climate change. And then the other one that I really wanted to focus on, op-eds, usually a little bit longer, and these are also written by a community member, but often the person is asked because of their expertise or their activism by the newspaper to write these. So whereas with a letter to the editor, you basically decide that you want to write something and have the newspaper review it. In this case, this would be something that the paper asks you for, or something that you pitch to the newspaper because you feel like you have expertise or a perspective where you could talk in more detail than just that 100 to 500 word limit. You could talk to something, you know, in something that's a little bit more of a short essay or a little longer. And we'll talk about how you could submit this too, because I think this is an important option, given that all of you are really building great expertise through Gen Clio, and that you all have really interesting and diverse perspectives to share. I think this is a good potential opportunity. And then finally, just so we're clear on the other things that appear in editorial sections, obviously we have editorials and columns, and those are written by newspaper staff, either by the editorial board, which is the editorial page editor and then some other staff members, or by staff columnists. And again, this is opinion. This is the opinion side of the paper. Similar to the other 2 types of editorial content that we've discussed, editorials, again, written by the newspaper's editorial board. They're usually to highlight an issue or give an opinion. They're also used to endorse political candidates. So I wanted to go through some examples now, and we'll do this via the chat, and then if people want to chime in, Salo or Huli, sorry, whatever you think is best. I just wanted to go through some examples and identifying the different types of content that you might see in a newspaper's editorial section. So who can guess what kind of content this is based on the 4 options that we just went through? This is an easy one. Good job, Laura, cartoon. Yes, correct. Okay, next one. So on this slide, it's all the same article. This is the full article, and then here's so you can read a little bit of it, and then here's some more information about the person who wrote it. So what kind of piece is this?
Can you go through the options again?
So we have editorials and columns, we have letters to the editor, we have op-eds, and we have cartoons. What do you all think this one is? Here's a hint. The word is on the page. Yes, good job. Linda, good job. It's an editorial column. Right, it's written by a columnist. So editorials are usually written by a group of people, the editorial board, and then columns are written by a staff writer for the newspaper. Okay, next one. What do you all think this one is? And again, the options are editorials and columns, letters to the editor, op-eds, or cartoons. I can't. Okay, Julia says columnist. Sabrina says letter to the editor. Anyone else want to weigh in? Cheetos hand. Letter to the editor. Good. Linda and Sabrina and Ingrid, you guys are correct. This is a letter to the editor. So it seems like there was a little bit of confusion on, why this is a letter to the editor versus a column, but you see how it's pretty short, and it's written by someone with their name and then their place of residence listed after. So typically if you see something like that, where it doesn't say something to indicate that they're a staff writer, like it did a couple of slides back, right here where it said he's a Sun Sentinel columnist, that usually means it's a letter to the editor, if there's no position or expertise given. All right, next one. We have 2 or 3 more of these. So again, I pasted in the headline here. The whole piece is about 600 words long, and this is the last 2 sentences of it. So do we think editorial and column, letter to the editor, op-ed, or cartoon? Op-ed, says Lizzie. Anyone else? Linda, Maya? Awesome. Good job, you guys. Yes, this is an op-ed. And this is a good one because it's an example of connecting a challenge that most people see as environmental to the coronavirus. So just keep that in mind. This is an example we might want to come back to when we talk about writing our own letters to the editor and op-eds. Okay. Oops. No. These slides will all be sent out too, so there are links in here, which is why I shouldn't be clicking the slides, but when you do receive them, you'll be able to read all these in full. Okay, so what do we think this one is? Somehow the chat function disappeared. There we go. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time reading the chat. Okay, so we have one person who's saying it's a letter to the editor, one who's saying it's an op-ed, it looks like. So this one is actually a decoy. This is just me pasting in images from the front page of the newspaper, not a letter to the editor or an op-ed. And then 2 more. I'm gonna try to get back into presenter mode.
I can also read out the answers too.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be helpful. For some reason, I'm not able to read the chat right now. So
I'll be the narrator for the chat.
Yes, please. Okay, so what do we think this one is? It's about 1,000 words long. You can see the headline and some information about the author. Salo, what are people saying?
So Ingrid is saying it's a letter to the editor.
Okay.
Anybody else want to give it a guess?
I tried to make these so they get trickier and I'd give you less information going on as we go through this.
Veronica says it's an editorial. Katrina and Brenda say it's an op-ed. Tarek says editorial. Julia, an opinion piece, op-ed, yep. So some consensus around an editorial or an op-ed.
Okay. Someone says Linda says it's too long for an letter to the editor. Lots of people saying op-ed. All of you guys are correct. This was submitted to the New York Times by Miss Meehan Christ. And you can see how it describes what her position is here. So she's not on staff with the New York Times. And because it has, you know, her byline, so her name is at the top, it's not just sort of like signed like a letter might be, like we saw earlier. That's how you know it's an op-ed. Okay, one more. I need to really stop clicking the links in this. No, come back. Okay. Come on. Okay, so last one. This is a lot of information on one slide, but basically I put in headline, some images, some info, and this is the main sentence that kind of lays out what this piece is about. What does everyone think it is? And Salo, I am once again not seeing the chat, so if you would like to narrate.
So Aiden says it's an editorial. Isabella says editorial. Ingrid and Lizzie also say editorial.
All right. Looks like we have a consensus. You are all correct. This is an editorial by the editorial board. And I put this one in here too, because if you click on the link, you can look and go and read about more about the people who make up the editorial board. They want to distinguish themselves as opinion journalists rather than journalists who focus on news. And that's really important because there's so much confusion these days with commentary and fake news and, you know, not facts that are being presented as facts. It's really important to know who the sources are. So does anyone have any questions before we move on about the differences among letters to the editor, op-eds, columns? Hopefully cartoons are pretty straightforward, but if not, feel free to ask about those as well. Salo, are we getting any questions?
No, not for now. And feel free to put whatever questions, even if it's like not time for questions. And if I see any questions, I'll let you also know throughout the presentation.
Okay, awesome. All right. Oh, they came back. All right. And is the Q&A function separate from the chat?
It is, but we also haven't had any questions in the Q&A either.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so now let's talk about what makes an effective letter to the editor or op-ed. And here's where I'd like Cara to chime in, but the things that came to mind for me were, first of all, making it concise and to the point. You know, connecting with your passion, connecting it to the news or writing about something that brings a new perspective on the news. And then I know you all talk about this a lot with Cleo as far as connecting the dots. So making the connections between climate change and the climate crisis and some other things that we might be experiencing in the world today. So from my perspective, those are the four things that are key, but I wanted to talk with Cara a little bit about this just because of her experience. So Cara, if we can bring you in here.
And also there is a question now. It says, Ingrid from Gen Cleo Tallahassee asks, op-eds are longer than letters to the editor, right?
Yes, that's correct. Usually you're invited to write an op-ed. Sometimes you might have to pitch it, like you write to the editor of the paper and say, hey, I have this idea. I think it's a little longer than a letter to the editor. You give maybe a quick description of what it is, and then they'll tell you yes or no, like we would accept an op-ed on that. So yes, op-eds tend to be like, I'd say, I don't remember the number that I gave in here, but anywhere from like 400 to 800 words, whereas letters to the editor are typically shorter.
Yes. Well, sure, I'll chime in. Hey, everybody. This is Cara Fleischer in Tallahassee, and just excited to be with you guys. I'm thrilled that you're learning how to write letters to the editor, and I know that I just want you to know that your voices are so important, and you have such a great power in sharing your point of view. And don't ever think that because you don't have a degree in climate science, or even that you've graduated from high school, that your voice isn't really important and can really help bring about change. So I just want to encourage you in that way. Now, the big thing about writing op-eds or LTEs is that you're trying to persuade your readers in a very few amount of words. So you want to be really concise and speak your truth. But what you want to do is have these folks who may not know anything about what you're talking about take one step towards what you want them to do. So try not to use jargon, try not to assume that they already know everything that you know about climate change or whatever your topic is, and bring it back home to how it's affecting you and the people you love in your community, to be able to relate to the other people in your community.
Yeah, I think, go ahead. I was going to say,
you go.
Go ahead. After you.
Okay. Well, for example, when I started writing about climate change, I wrote from a mom's view, and this was a unique voice at the time. And I talked about my kids in particular, living in Florida, living in Tallahassee, and that was a place that no one else was filling. And so that my voice became important because I was speaking my truth. And I was a little bit nervous about doing that because I didn't have a climate degree. And I had that feeling of, well, who am I? Who's going to want to read what I have to say? But it turns out a lot of people did. So I think the most important thing is just being really true to yourself and finding the story that, you know, is unique to you. But doing it in a really clear and concise way.
Cara, was there a particular moment when you decided to start writing for the Democrat? Can you kind of tell us the story of how you came to be a regular contributor there, and what sorts of, are you a columnist, or what sort of writing do you do for them?
I'm a regular contributor. So I have a blog, and it's tied into the Democrats. So whenever I write stories, the editor gets it, and usually we'll run them. So that's pretty nice. And I try to, you know, just be telling a story that people can relate to, but weave in the environmental issues that I care about. So, you know, and you can go to carafleischer.com if you want to see my stories, just to get an idea. But I started because I was a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, and I was trained on how to write letters to the editor. And I used to be a creative writing major, and I was in public relations, so this wasn't new to me, but I never thought I'd be writing about something I cared about. It was more of my job before, but they empowered me to write a letter to the editor, and it was called Climate Change, A Mom's View. And I submitted it to our editor, and they ran it. And I thanked her. I emailed her, and we started a relationship going. And that's the other thing I would recommend doing, is get to know who your editors are. They're just people, and they're really busy. But, you know, for Valentine's Day, I brought them brownies. Who knew that was going to be such a great gesture? But from that point on, they invited me to be a regular writer for the paper. So I think that, you know, we all have unique stories to tell. And if you can take the time in your editing, I think that's the biggest, you know, takeaway I had from working with the paper. There's a style guide called the AP Style, and that's what newspapers use. It's online. It's not a bad idea just to open that up and take a look at it. I know that our editor, I just took another class with her because, you know, you don't ever stop learning. And her big thing was, do not ever use more than one exclamation point in any article or piece of writing. And it's better not to use them at all. But
wait, like, don't use more than one in a row, or don't use more than one total in the entire piece?
Total.
Wow.
Total. Don't ever use more than one in a row ever, but use only one, because her point is the words should be the strength. You shouldn't have to depend on exclamation points to make your point strong.
We have some questions as well, if you want to answer them, Cara, Kate. So
Sure.
Isabella Reno from Miami asks, besides LTEs and op-eds, do you recommend any other ways to become involved with your local newspaper for teenagers? And then a second question is, what did you say to search up to find your works?
Would you be able to put in her webpage?
I could do that.
Okay, yeah.
I can type it.
And I can, oh, perfect. There we go. So yeah, Cara, do you have any thoughts on how teenagers can be involved in the newspaper?
I mean, that's a really good question. I wonder if some newspapers would offer internships, maybe some opportunities to volunteer. I know that they are all completely slammed, very busy. I think that's one of the reasons why I get published so much, is because they just need content. Their staff is being, trimmed and trimmed and trimmed. So I say it's a great opportunity to email your editor and say, I'm really interested in journalism, and I was wondering if you had any internships, or, that's a great way to get a relationship too, and get some mentoring.
Yeah, I was gonna say my first news, so prior to becoming a resilience officer, I worked as a journalist for a long time, well, a relatively long time in the course of my career. And the way that I got my first internship was literally by emailing the paper and saying, hey, I would love to write for you guys. And like, I'm about to go to journalism school. This was my senior year of high school. I was like, I'm about to go to journalism school. I'd love to come, contribute a few hours a week and like maybe write an article or two for you over the course of the summer. They ended up giving me a full-time internship because they were a very small newspaper in northern Wisconsin and just like desperately short-staffed, and they figured out a way to pay me. So I think to your point earlier about making a relationship with the editor, that's super important, Cara. And whether it's through like submitting letters to the editor somewhat regularly and going back and forth via email and saying thank you, or if it's also doing things like baking brownies or just expressing an interest, I think if you show that you're interested, they'll figure out ways to work with you and your particular strengths. And newspapers need photographers too, so that's something to keep in mind. If you have an idea for how to contribute photos, or if you're a good cartoonist and you could submit like an editorial cartoon, that might be another option just based on the things that they're looking for.
I also want to remind all of our students and just general people on the call, regardless of where you are, if you're in Tallahassee or if you're in Miami, when you think newspaper, oftentimes, especially in Miami, we think Miami Herald, but there are dozens of newspapers when you really think about like your local area. So like Hialeah, like small cities a lot of the times have like online publications, like online newspapers. So when we're talking about getting to know your editor, we're not only talking about like only the Tallahassee Democrat or only the Miami Herald. Like look at the other smaller publications in your area and develop relationships with those writers and those editors as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe you could weigh in on Tallahassee, Salo, or you as well, Cara. But in Miami, I mean, we have the New Times, we have the New Tropic, we have I forget the name of the newspaper that's like the Biscayne Corridor newspaper, the Biscayne Times. So yes, we do think of the Herald, but there are plenty of other places as well. Even my former radio station, WLRN, they love to hear from listeners. Like you can send them audio recordings that you just make on your cell phone. And I can give you more information. My email address is later on in this presentation. So if you're interested in having your voice heard on radio, I can help tell you how to do that. And I think radio stations throughout Florida love that sort of engagement from their audience. Cara, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say in Tallahassee, we have 3 major universities and colleges. So that's another place. Each one of those have their own newspapers. And we've had some success, providing them with content. I think the most important thing is just, it needs to relate to their readers and to the local issues. They don't want a press release from a national organization. They want to hear from, like, for example, a high school student, how these issues are affecting them, what they're thinking about, what they're concerned about, how it's affecting their family and friends. And I think that those voices are really sought after because it's uncommon to get content from high school students. And you can include a photo. I think that, as long as you write from the heart, they can help you with the editing and the grammar too. Do your best. The real story is you write out everything. And it might be 1,500 words when you just type it out. And then the big job is to go back and edit and edit and edit some more until you get it down to like that 500 words, you know, or 800, depending on what you're submitting.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have questions for Cara? Or otherwise, I have a few more as well. But I want to make sure that we're getting to everyone who might have something on their mind. And you can ask me questions too, obviously. But she's the one who's currently writing for a media outlet.
Isabella Reno from Miami says, when writing a letter to the editor, would it be better to write emotionally or professionally?
I would say emotionally, unless you are coming at it from a professional office or job. But for high school students, I think emotionally, just sharing your point of view, sharing why you care, why other people should care, that to me seems like is what really is going to resonate and set you apart. Do you agree?
Yeah. I would say you can write it as both. I mean, hopefully, ideally, you'd be in a profession that reflects your passion. So there's some overlap of emotion and professionalism. I'm lucky that my job as a resilience officer, where I'm basically managing Surfside's response to different local climate impacts, that's very much in line with the things that I care about personally, in climate change in particular, but also, you know, elements of community justice. And I think that a lot of people, hopefully in this chat, are thinking both in terms of what they care about and the emotion that brings them to the professional aspirations that they might have. I would say, like, avoid really, really strong emotions, like Cara's point about the 7 or 8 exclamation points, just keep it to 1. That's good. Like, don't write in all caps. Don't, it needs to sound professional, but you should definitely use words and ideas that convey the emotions that you're feeling. And then the professional part can be, you know, either related to your job or sort of the more scientific aspects of things.
That sounds good.
So I have a couple more questions for you, Cara, but also if there's anything that you want to bring up too. I was curious to know responses that you received from your readers about the things that you write. What's the feedback then, and how do you proceed from there? Is it positive?
It usually is positive. I know for my paper, they require that you give an email address. So I do that, and then I check that email address. You're not required to give your phone number, and it's totally up to you if you want to respond to the you know, people who are contacting you. Just a couple of people haven't been on board with the whole climate change is real thing, and I pretty much don't engage those, but a lot of people are like, thank you, this was exactly what I wanted to hear or needed to hear. And I tell you what it really does, it opens doors to connect you with other people in your community that are doing this kind of work. You know, if they don't come to you, you can go to them and say, hey, look, this was printed. You can even go talk to your mayor. I mean, it really does give you some credibility when you get published anywhere, anytime. You could cut out that and send it to all of your city council members and say, you know, this was important to me. I hope you'll consider this when you're, you know, coming up with your new rules or XYZ. But for the most part, it's been really positive. And if you start writing regularly, it's really weird how people start to recognize you that you never knew would.
Yeah. And it looks good on college applications too. Like, if you're someone who's engaged and regularly writing for a newspaper, that's a big selling point, because it shows that you're civically active and you're a thoughtful person and that you have some experience with writing. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I think for the last 10 or so minutes here, I just wanted to go back to climate change and the coronavirus, because again, we want to think about, can everyone see my screen here now? I don't know if I'm sharing or not yet. Okay, 1 second. So I want to go back to climate change and the coronavirus, because obviously one of the things that's a good selling point for a letter to the editor or for an op-ed is if you can connect it to the news, again, since it's a newspaper. So I have some thoughts about some of the connections between climate change and coronavirus. But I would kind of like to hear from everyone else, because we're all living through this right now. So I'm curious about what you all are feeling and any connections that you see between the two global crises that we're experiencing at the moment. So does anyone want to share through the chat, or I don't know, Huli and Salo, if we want to unmute people, if they indicate, raise their hand or
That's a
something?
great idea. If you go, all of our participants, at the very bottom, there should be like a little two people, and then it should say participants. When you open up your participant window, you're actually able to raise your hand. So in the participant window at the bottom, it says like raise hand. And if you raise your hand, I can see that and I can unmute you. Or you can just write it in the chat. Perfect. So we already have one person. So this is Ingrid Hanley. And then when I unmute you, feel free to say like where you're coming from too, like what area.
Hi, Ingrid.
So you're on mute. So even though I unmuted you, you still have to unmute you too.
Okay, so my name is Ingrid and I'm from Tallahassee. Something that I've seen comparing the two crises is that since people aren't getting out as much in their cars, the pollution in the air has gone down. Mm-hmm. And something I saw a little while ago is that in Venice, since people aren't going out on their, I don't know, boats or something, the water is clear there. So all the pollution is out of the water. So climate change is, well, lessening, I guess, since we're all staying home.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that's been pretty widely documented, where because the pollution in China has decreased really significantly, and even here in Miami, I feel like there are so many people who are just outside walking around instead of using their cars. So I think that's a really good point, that because we're not out and about as much, that's having really beneficial impacts on the environment. Do we have another one? That's from Cara. Okay. Any other ideas, connections, or how are you guys feeling about all of this? Because for me, it's like, I'm kind of angry. Like, people are responding to coronavirus like, oh my gosh, this is a big global emergency and we need to be doing something about it right now. But meanwhile, climate change, it's still kind of, I feel like it's overshadowed almost, and the emergency response isn't there. So I don't know if anyone else has felt that sort of anger.
So we have WLRN from Miami. Go for it, Isabella.
Hi, my name is Isabella. I was just actually wondering, coming back to like Ingrid's point, I was just wondering if we, is it thought that if we stay at home longer, like during this quarantine, that like the environment would continue to better itself and heal itself as we all remain indoors? Like, or do people believe that it's gonna like return back to like completely back to like the way it was before we all decided to go on this quarantine?
That's such a good question. So it depends on the decision that we make. If we decide to come out of this quarantine and continue on our merry way, allowing oil prices, or increasing our demand for gas and oil again, and continuing to do the things that we know are so destructive to the environment and that increase our greenhouse gas emissions, things are going to go back to the way they were. But I really feel like we're at a turning point and a tipping point where, because the world is sort of on pause right now, we can emerge from this and take advantage of opportunities to reduce our greenhouse gas emission and kind of live in a new way. The fact that we're having this meeting over Zoom instead of in person, we didn't drive or fly anywhere, and people are working from home now, like that's a huge step towards reducing our global greenhouse gas emissions, because if every single company requires most of its employees to do that, all of a sudden you have a bunch more people who are not emitting greenhouse gases trying to get to and from work. So I think that, again, the decision just really, or the impact that we see or the trend line that we see coming out of this just really depends on the decisions we make about how we go back to the world once kind of the pause is taken off.
Kate, I'd love to add to that.
Please.
This is Cara. I just really have seen how fast the world can react when we have to. And it kind of gives me hope that we can do this. We can really make the big changes that we need to make. And what we need to do is get the right leadership in place to make those changes. But I really do believe that it's been proven now for a month that the earth will be able to heal. We will be able to recover, but we need to have the right leadership to make it happen. So it has, you know, unfortunately, this is not the way we would want to have to do this, but still, I think it's going to be used as a model of how we can act very quickly.
And I mean, I really feel like that's why now is the time for people to be doing things like writing letters to the editor. You guys all understand what the climate crisis is. You understand what we could be doing about it. And we are in a moment where you can really push for change. You know, people are looking right now to see when life is going to get back to normal. Well, let's not talk about just going back to the same old normal where we're spewing greenhouse gas emissions into the air. Let's talk about how we move forward into a new normal. And because you all are educated on climate change and the causes and some of the things we can do about it, you need to be helping spread the word if that's really an opportunity we're going to take advantage of.
Yes, and you know, unfortunately, our economy is going to really need a lot of work to get back. So why not move to the green economy that's going to create millions of jobs? Like now is the time to do it.
Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. So we have Veronica Bloomberg. So go for it, Veronica. What's your question or thought?
Hi, am I off mute?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I've been talking to Julieta recently within Gen Cleo, and we noticed that as a result of the coronavirus, there's been a major reliance on science and scientists and American public opinion. And we know that there's a scientific consensus that climate change is human-induced and is happening now, but we don't really know the faces of those scientists. So I feel like now we have a really big opportunity to increase that same reliance and same trust within climate scientists stemming from the coronavirus.
Absolutely. I would love to see an op-ed that talks about that, how, you know, we, in our response to this crisis, the coronavirus crisis, we have leaned on scientists and listened to experts, and it's paying off. We are flattening the curve. Why should we not be able to do the same thing with the greenhouse gas emissions curve? The solutions are there. People are telling us what they are. We need to listen to their expertise.
That's beautiful. That was one of the last hands raised. Please feel free to continue raising your hand, or if you don't want to talk, to write it in the chat. Elizabeth Bonnell wrote on the chat that I feel like an upside to this pandemic is that people are realizing how much they enjoy being outdoors, hiking, fishing, gardening, spending time with family. I also feel that companies may be realizing it isn't as necessary to have people physically be present at work. I think this may be a good opportunity for a cultural shift focused around less daily traffic during rush hours and the greater appreciation of people in nature. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm pretty sure she's from Miami as well.
Elizabeth, you should put that in a letter to the editor. A positive of the coronavirus crisis.
Yep, that's the letter right there. That's great.
Exactly. So just in the last 5 minutes or so here, I wanted to go through a few additional connections that I see. Again, the slides will be shared, so I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly, and then you're welcome to go back through them and look at some of the links. And all of these are news stories now. These are not opinion or editorial pieces. These are just fact-based journalism. Okay, so one connection, I mean, we talk a lot about climate change and global inequity. Well, that's something that we're seeing with the coronavirus crisis. This article in the New York Times is about how in Africa, like they don't have very many ventilators, but let alone very basic supplies like oxygen and soap. And we're thinking about climate change in these terms too, that, you know, people who don't have regular access to water, well, they're just going to be hit so much harder by this crisis. People who don't have regular access to water to wash their hands, like the people in this story, they're going to be hit so much harder by coronavirus. So definitely inequity is something to keep in mind. And then related to that, Black and brown communities being hit the hardest. And we're seeing that even in South Florida, where people who people who are African American in particular have a much higher rate of death from the coronavirus than people who are white and Hispanic here. So that's another connection we could make. Also, going back again to who's vulnerable, seniors and people with chronic health problems are the most vulnerable to coronavirus, and many of them are also the most vulnerable to climate change. One of the stories that I worked on when I was with WLRN, the radio station, was going into a hurricane shelter during Hurricane Irma. And as we all know, hurricanes are getting stronger because of climate change. In that shelter, it was 3 nights of elderly people sleeping on the tile floor because they didn't know to bring cots. There was no medical support for them. And I think that this same struggle with medical support for the elderly is a vulnerability that's been exposed by the coronavirus as well. You think about the nursing homes where people are just, I mean, the New York Times had a story this morning talking about how nursing homes are death pits in the middle of the coronavirus. And I think there are parallels to be drawn there with the climate crisis too. Another connection is this idea of simultaneous crises. And if there's only one article that you read in all of the articles in this presentation, this is the one I would recommend, because it talks about how coronavirus is just going to make our response to natural disasters caused by climate change so much more complicated. I mean, I think this question, how do you shelter in place during an evacuation? That's really, really relevant in Florida. If we have to evacuate for a hurricane this year and we're still under social distancing, that means people are going to be either going to shelters and at high risk of spreading the coronavirus, or, staying at home and being at risk from a hurricane. So this is really, this is a public safety and public health issue that's happening starting June 1st. That's the start of hurricane season. So that's something to think about. And then also there's this general idea that, climate change is increasing the risks of natural disasters overall. So we could go through something where we have both a hurricane and, a wildfire or something in Florida at the same time. And that's really going to deplete our state's emergency management resources. And so just to think about, as we get to have more and more concurrent or simultaneous crises because of climate change, what does that do to our ability to respond to those? Another one, obviously the economic disruption. We know that climate change is going to cause a huge amount of disruption to the global economy. Well, I think there are something like 22 million jobless claims filed in the United States in the past month. So that parallel kind of speaks for itself. Another connection about policymakers taking proactive action, and this ties into listening to the scientists as well. The writing is on the wall for both the corona crisis and the climate crisis. And I feel like it's almost like, in respects, it's felt like we're standing on train tracks and watching the train come toward us. And so we really need to be thinking proactively about getting ourselves off the tracks. And obviously this ties back into the kind of endorsement section of the opinion pages as well, not just, who are you endorsing as a political candidate? This is the sort of connection that you could be bringing up when you make that argument. And then here are some solutions, because those were all kind of like gloom and doomy, as Caroline Lewis might say, not the most positive things to be thinking about, but there's also, to the points that people were talking about earlier, there are a lot of opportunities here. This crisis has demonstrated how we can live without oil. The headline of this story is about how oil demand has dropped just by a colossal amount. Well, when we come out of this, let's keep it down. Let's figure out ways to move towards, sustainable transportation rather than going back to the status quo. And I think the point needs to be made as loudly as we can that we can live without this, and we are living without this. Another solution that I see is the idea of buying local and cutting food waste. I don't know if any of you saw the articles in recent weeks about how farmers in Homestead and the Redlands and, really across the country have been having to plow their crops under and burn just thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of perfectly good produce because the economy has shut down. And, restaurants obviously are not buying anymore. And, there's the transportation, the people who support, who are truck drivers and who work on sort of like product delivery from fields to consumers. they're not working as much right now because we're all under social distancing. And the result is, as a result of that, our supply chain has really been disrupted. But in response, there have been solutions figured out where people are now going directly to growers in their area and able to pick up produce, and, you know, farmers markets, and sort of even like delivery from your local farm is taking off as a result of this. So this is something we could keep going on to. We talked about teleworking already. There's some good evidence that, I mean, we all know that telework is growing. I think many of you are going to school remotely right now. Maybe that's something we could continue. We talked about listening to scientists. The last two are about sort of the drawdown connection. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book Drawdown. It was an effort led by Paul Hawken to identify the biggest solutions or solutions-oriented actions that we can take to address the climate crisis. Well, one of the things that we're seeing in the coronavirus crisis is that women are disproportionately the ones who are caretakers. They're the ones who have to make decisions for their families. You know, what are we buying? What are we doing? You know, they're taking care of maybe elderly parents or young children. Not that men don't do those things too, but globally that work tends to fall on women. And so we need to make sure that the people, and by and large, again, women, who are making decisions on the day-to-day lives of their families are well educated on the challenges we're facing, and that they're elevated into positions where they can make smart choices when it comes to what they're buying, or, you know, make the decision that, okay, maybe our family doesn't need to, you know, fly across creation and all the way to Europe on vacation. You know, we could be close to home. So I think this ties back into Drawdown really well, because one of the main solutions proposed there is to elevate and educate women in response to both of these crises. And then finally, I think one solution that applies to any crises, whether it's climate related or coronavirus, or, you know, something like even a terrorism attack, there's a need to lead with empathy. And that's something I'd really like to stress to all of you, because I think all of you, the fact that you're engaged with Clio right now in high school is a really good indicator of the kinds of leaders that you're going to become. So I would encourage you to look for examples of people who are leading with empathy, and yes, acknowledging the challenges that we're all facing, but also talking about how we can be united in a response to either of these crises, and ideally to both of them at the same time. So I'm going to leave it there on the connections. I'm happy to take more questions on that. Hopefully we have a little time left at the end. This is just, and again, these slides will go out, so you'll be able to click on the links and see where you can submit letters to the editor to your local papers. There's also the Invading Sea, which is a statewide collaboration of major news outlets. They accept letters to the editor and op-eds as well. If you want to write for them, let me know and I can introduce you to the editor there. These are just some additional places where if you want to learn about climate and corona connections, there are links here. This heated newsletter is particularly good. They focus on responses to climate change, and they're doing a special podcast series about coronavirus and climate change connections. So that's it for me. If we have a few minutes for questions, any additional questions, I think that would be great, but Salo and Huli, I'll defer to you guys.
Sure. So Carrie Roach actually shared a link around a lack of emergency generators, unfortunately, in Broward County. And Ingrid also wanted to point out that she's not in high school. She's actually in middle school.
Oh, wow.
And that, to Ingrid's point, I also wanted to make the offer that any Gen Clio member, and if you're wondering, like, am I a Gen Clio member? If you're in this webinar, you are. Like, all you need to do to be a Gen Clio member is to just come to our events or sign up. If you want to write a letter to the editor, all next week, the Gen Clio staff in the Tallahassee office is going to be helping mentor young students that are writing letters to the editor. Even if you want to like take a crack at an op-ed, it's Earth Day and it's Earth Month. So this is a really great opportunity to be able to kind of like pick one of these connections that Kate just drew, figure out your own connection. And if you want some advice or help or just like feedback on how to write your letter to the editor and where to submit it, reach out to us. I'll put my email in the chat, and ask us additional questions. If you want to talk if you want to talk, raise your hand. Cara also put her email on the chat. Brenda asks, will Kate share the PowerPoint with us by email?
Yes. Well, I think I'll let you guys share the PowerPoint because you have the email addresses, but yes.
Cool. Julia just shared another link as well. And then Ingrid, I know that you wrote on the chat, but you also have your hand up, so I'm gonna allow you to talk again if you wanna mention something. Your voice, your screen.
I'm actually not in middle school either. I'm in 5th grade and I'm going into middle school next year.
Sorry, I forgot, Ingrid.
It's okay. And
one of our youngest Gen Cleo leaders in Tallahassee, and she's at everything. Actually, Ingrid, I saw that you signed up for our Cleo Speakers Network as well. So
yeah,
you become a certified climate speaker.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to say that was in the PowerPoint about like doing online school. Sure, we're not using we're not releasing admissions by using our cars to like get to school, but just something else is that since I'm like one of the people who is actually kind of having to deal with like starting online school, it's not that great. It's a lot of different places we need to be. So I think it would be like great if we found a way to reduce admissions after this coronavirus, but I don't think that's one of the most reasonable ways.
That's a really good point. And that's the sort of thing that you should put out there too, because I don't think a lot of people are necessarily thinking in those terms. I mean, every decision that we make has trade-offs. Nothing is going to be the perfect solution to this. So, I mean, if you see something that you want to respond to, or even if you just want to raise that point yourself, that like on the one hand, yes, online school is great for carbon emissions. On the other hand, the quality of my education is suffering. That might be a good thing to point out. And also to say, you know, let's hear ideas for more solutions and be part of the dialogue. Encourage that kind of conversation with your community.
I love that. So we have time for one last question. It's already 3:01, but the last question is Isabela Reno, and you are able to talk. Go for it, Isabela.
Yeah. So Ingrid has great points. The online school thing, it's affecting like a lot of our education, like throughout the entire grading scale from like 1st grade to like 12th grade. I'm actually gonna be an incoming junior this fall, which is actually kind of crazy because junior year is the most important year for like high schoolers, as that's when we take the most APs and our SATs and ACTs, and we're starting to prepare to go to college. And honestly, this online school thing isn't really like, can't be a permanent fixture, seeing as even like, for example, like getting like having our classes in, like it would help a lot with like what's going on with our environment. And that's something I wish that like we could keep, but like this online school thing is like not helping anybody. I'm out of school at 10:30 a.m. and I have the rest of the day to do nothing except like study and prepare for other classes, and it's actually really crazy. I also like I'm friends with a couple seniors in my class in my school, and they're all going crazy because they were gonna do college tours and all these things they had planned, and now they can't do them anymore because of the COVID-19. And I was talking to one of my friends who's like really into like the whole like climate change. Like I'm a fanatic, but she's even more, she's crazier than I am. And she was like talking to me and she was like, listen, actually, this whole thing is really bettering the environment, but it's not bettering society as a whole. Like the people who are graduating this year are like woefully unprepared because they thought they had like this certain amount of time left. And now like they're not prepared to go out into the real world, and they're missing months of education that could have really helped us like in the future to like make better decisions as like a society concerning like politics, environmental policy, all these kind of things. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to point out.
Yeah, I think those are really good points from both of you. Maybe one way to think about that is both writing a letter or an op-ed piece or something that talks about the problem, but then also things that you see as solutions. So, okay, like in the midst of this coronavirus, yes, we have to go to online school, but if we're out at 10:30 in the morning, maybe that provides opportunities to do other educational things. Like, I mean, writing letters is a great example of that. You know, if you're writing to educate your community, if you're doing things that are in community service, that could be sort of a short-term, it doesn't really replace school, but it sort of at least enhances the education that you're getting online. And then in the long, and you could do, maybe one of the educational things that you could suggest is like, let's think about other ways, or let's research other ways for people to get a high quality education without a significant carbon impact. Because I agree with you. I don't think that like that online school where you're in your bedroom all day long on the computer is necessarily the best solution. So maybe there's research that could be done around that, and that's something you could push for.
I would just say too that I have a senior daughter right now, and it's been the saddest month because she's missed senior prom, you know, senior trips to Universal Studios. I mean, it's just been pretty devastating, and we don't know if there's even going to be a graduation. But maybe you could say in your op-ed something like, yes, this might be better for the environment. But as a student, I hope that there's other ways once everything is, you know, once we're past this pandemic, that we can reduce our emissions, but still be able to go back to school. Like have the county switch to gas-powered buses, or natural gas-powered buses, or encourage, you know, people to get electric cars, or something like that. Because I agree 100% with two kids at home right now. They're missing their friends. They're missing out on so much social interaction. I don't know that, you know, it should be on the students, but I will say business people that are flying all over the world every day, and now they're able to just do meetings like this online. I think that's a place. There's other places that we can cut back as well.
Well, thank you both so much. Thank you all of the people that participated, asked questions, and now it's 3:06, so I'm sorry we did run a little bit late, but I do want to provide the opportunity for closing comments as we end the webinar. Karen, Kate, do you want to close us out?
Well, I'm just really grateful for the opportunity, and I mean, please, if you want to be in touch with me, please do. I'd love to help elevate your voices, because I really think you have a lot of important things to say on this, and the world needs to hear them.
Yeah, I agree. And I just would encourage you to, you know, find what you're passionate about and persuade others through your writing. You know, you have a very important thing to say, and you can really make a difference. So just really proud of you all for taking these steps, and I'm excited to see what you do next. And so keep in touch.
Yeah, send us your stuff. If you get letters to the editor published, please share them.
Thank you everyone for coming. Unfortunately, we did run out of time, so we're not going to take any more questions, but please reach out to us. If you want to write something, let us know, and we're happy to help you with it. And remember, we do have an essay video contest. So if you end up writing a letter to the editor and you want to submit it for a chance to win $50, do so. Follow us on social media to get more information about that, and take a peek at the chat before we're closing within the next like 10 seconds to look at some of those additional comments that are added.
And you'll send out the slides, correct? You have everyone's email addresses?
Huli will definitely do that.
Perfect.
Yes, so I have everybody's email that registered, and I'll be sending out resources as well as all the links. I have a copy of all of the comments that were shared in the chat, so I'll include all of those member send links as well as panelists send links. And remember, we challenge you to write a letter to the editor and to get outside your comfort zone and try something new in this next week. We're all in this really stressful time, and sometimes writing can be a good outlet when you're feeling sort of flustered or frustrated, scared. You know, there really is a power to your voice. So we'd love to help you in that. If you have any ideas, something you want to write, definitely reach out, and keep an eye out for your email. And have a happy Earth Week, and we'll be in touch soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Good luck.